Hello and welcome to this episode of Bridge to China. Bridge to China is a podcast by Humboldt-Tech Bridge and ILU. With this podcast, we want to answer the most pressing questions European startups may have when it comes to China. My name is Max Klinschert, and in today's episode, I'm going to speak with Dr. Ferdinand Bartels. He's one of the initiators of Humboldt-Tech Bridge. That's a joint venture of Humboldt University of Berlin, which is also my university, and industry, with a goal to help European startups on their way to China. We're going to speak about how the initiative helps founders and why China has such a high potential for many startups. Hi Ferdinand, really happy to have you here on the Bridge to China podcast. You are the CEO of InnoEU, right?
Yes. First of all, welcome. I'm happy to be here. I am CEO of InnoEU, and also the InnoEU is a shareholder of Humboldt-Tech Bridge.
Cool. It would be really nice if you could explain a bit what the background of InnoEU is, just for our listeners to understand what the company does.
InnoEU is a consulting company, if you want. We are focusing on internationalization for startups. We are offering our services to innovation platforms and networks throughout of Europe, so from Portugal to Estonia, from Norway down to Italy. And we offer to the platforms services to provide internationalization options to the startups in the various countries in Europe, into China and also into other Asian countries. So the focus is on Asia. And due to the size of China, there's a lot of activity in China, of course, compared to other countries in the region.
Yeah, I understand.
So this is what we do. We have founded the company together, some Chinese friends of mine and myself. We have founded the company some 3 or 4 years ago. We all have an industry background working for large European corporations, and we all have China background on investment and business development in China. This is where we come from, and this is what has motivated us to start InnoEU to provide these services to the startups.
Yeah, I understand. And basically, you founded Humboldt-Tech Bridge together with Humboldt Innovation, right? Can you tell us a bit about Humboldt-Tech Bridge in general and the general idea behind it? I mean, it was founded in October last year, if I'm correct,
yes.
right?
Yes. Shortly before the COVID crisis came, we founded it. No, well, working on the InnoEU side, we typically work with European startups in the technology readiness level of 4 or 5. Maybe a little higher. So these are companies typically which have already some first sales, have a product, so there's a certain level of maturity. And we find that for them, it's a big strategy change to take China into their focus. It's in the lifetime of a startup, if you are in that level that you have the first sales and maybe the first financing round already, readjusting the strategy, readjusting the direction to China, it's very, very important, but at the same time also very difficult at that moment. Yeah. We certainly will discuss about what are the differences between China and Europe culturally and industry-wise. So normally you cannot transfer your business concept to China without any change. You have to make adjustments. Now, the idea now with Humboldt-Tech Bridge was we need to bring the services to the earlier startups, to the younger startups. We need to bring this into almost to the idea phase, so that the mind is already open to China and Asian issues on the industry, on the technology side, before the final product is being designed, before the prototype is being built, so that you take into account already the perspective of that. So that's the idea, and that's why we are focusing entirely on university-based deep tech startups that typically have products which have a strong interest in China, and we try to convince the owners or whoever they decide should focus on China. We convince them to start working with us and start working with China and implement that into their strategy early on.
Yeah, you mostly focus on science-based startups, right? You have a focus on smart manufacturing, advanced materials, biotech, medtech, AI, and Humboldt-Tech Bridge is basically a joint venture with Humboldt Innovation, which is itself a subsidiary of Humboldt University, right?
Yeah.
So in general, can you maybe tell us a bit about where the synergies are lying in this connection, and these two partners, how do they find each other and how are they working together? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on this.
Yeah, I mean, InnoEU, as I mentioned earlier, is working very closely with networks and innovation platforms and incubators. These are sometimes government-owned organizations and sometimes private organizations, depending on the country and location. So we're working probably with something like 50 or 60 of these networks together. Mm-hmm. And Humboldt Innovation is one of the very successful incubators, innovation centers of the Humboldt University here in Berlin. So we are also from Berlin. InnoEU is also from Berlin, so we are relatively close. And so we were working together on some of our InnoEU programs. And I got to know the managing director, Volker Hoffmann, during some of these meetings. We had some trips together to China. He lived in China for a while, so there's some closeness there. And when we were sitting down and discussing what are the real issues for startups when they want to internationalize, we realized that it would make a lot of sense if we bring our services to the startups at an earlier stage. And from that, the idea was generated to start a joint venture together with Humboldt Innovation to make it a bit more formal and to give this a structure, because that's something which InnoEU technically doesn't do. We don't normally work with startups at that early stage. So we said we need to bring this into a separate organization, and we need to bring this into a joint venture so that it becomes clear. Here's the Humboldt University, here's Humboldt Innovation, and we are addressing the researcher that has a good idea. Yeah, we are not addressing the startup that has already a finished product. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning, and and I'm sure China has an extremely well-established research market now. So the research infrastructure in China is absolutely excellent. I think it's a surprise that we still don't have a Nobel Prize winner from China, but sooner or later, not the first one will come, but sooner or later, we're going to see that probably half of all the Nobel Prizes in 20 years will go to Chinese research. However, we have this is a very international researchers from China, from United States, from Germany, from Norway, from whatever. They work together in many, many projects, in many deep tech projects, whether this is quantum computing or AI or whatever. Yet in the field of industry and startups, we don't have the same level of collaboration. Communication ends at that moment when somebody has an idea to start a business. And this is where fundamentally what we want to address. We want to build an element, a platform where startup founders can work with Chinese counterparts to make more innovative and better products. That's the mindset, that's the logic behind of what we are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great mission, especially that you want to focus on connecting people from all over Europe and then connecting this with China. I think this is a very great idea, and this is also something new, right? Is there any other company doing something like this, connecting like different parts of the European Union with China? Do you know, is there like something similar?
Not that I know of. I don't know everything, but Europe is a big place, and China is even so a big place. But I'm not aware that there is anything similar. We do have some friends and colleagues from state-owned organizations from China that have subsidiaries here in Europe. Some of them bigger, some of them smaller, because obviously China has an interest to attract companies to produce in China or to develop in China. And this is typically government-driven. We are a pure private initiative, so we don't have any government links with any kind. It's a private initiative from some, as I mentioned before, of some older industry people that try to bring their experience and their expertise into this marketplace. And we are running around with our ideas and telling the people that please do this, please do that. And sometimes we find some sponsors for what we are doing. But in principle, I think we are certainly unique as a private initiative in this area.
I see. And in general, You said that you're focusing more on the early stage companies now. And we also talked about the focus areas that you have with InnoEU. We talked about that you're focusing on science-based startups. For me, just to understand what you particularly focus on, would be good to know, like, where do you draw the line? What's a scientific startup for you? Is it just someone who is in university? Is it someone who has a technology that is very science oriented? How would you define this?
Well, let me first comment on the science-based startup field. In principle, neither HTB nor InnoEU is restricted to any technical area. So whether you're even fintech or so, there's nothing written in our document that we couldn't take it. The reality is that due to the structure of the founders, we all come from the manufacturing area, we all come from the high-tech area, the tendency is that we have more tech-type startups than others. And with HTB, we are focusing only on deep tech university-based innovators. And we don't understand ourselves as judges for technology. So the founders that are coming to us, probably they have discussed this endlessly with their professors, probably they have discussed this endlessly with some advisors or friends, and they think that their idea is brilliant. And this has a great future, this idea. We, in principle, we want to emphasize, we want to comfort them. I'm not here to tell them your idea is not great, because who am I? So I think regardless where they come from, regardless which department of the university they come from, if they have an idea, and if they have gone through the phases of at least thinking or maybe starting to found their independent company, I think they deserve that we support them. That can be critical also, but we are not an organization which is judged. We are not selecting in a way that we say this type of technology deserves to be supported and this type of technology does not deserve to be supported. That's not our job, and that's not the way we understand ourselves.
Yeah. So how does this selection process work? How can I imagine this process to work?
Well, when we do our programs, the selection process is simple and complicated at the same time. As I mentioned, we don't judge the idea, but we judge the structure and we judge the story behind. So the first question is, do you have a team? Is there somebody else but yourself that believes? So if that's not the case, then the chances of succeeding is virtually zero. When we talk about internationalization, then it's critically important that there is an IP strategy.
Intellectual property.
Intellectual property, patents, any kind, brand names, whatever is key in your market segment you're in. If that's not 100% clear, we don't make the decision for the startup, but if it's not clear that the startup has a strategy here, then we don't take him to China. Too risky. So this part is what we definitely do. And the third part is that we are discussing, and when we're selecting, we are looking very closely into whether this is something that from a strategy and from a business principle has a chance in China. Not everything works, because culturally it's not interested there. It's something which is, I don't know. I mean, pizza delivery maybe not the greatest idea for China. I have no idea. Normally I don't work in that field, but typically scalability of an innovation is, and when you scale it, then probably it makes sense. Is it a differentiating technology? That makes sense. Is it differentiating regionally, or is it not differentiating regionally? That makes difference. So these are criteria which we are looking for.
I see. Yeah, I think I'd like to take you back to this point about what businesses are interesting for China and what are not to a bit later. But at first, I want to get into another part just to really understand the concept Humboldt-Tech Bridge, or HTB as you call it. Quite long name. So
yeah. Sorry for the abbreviations. Yeah, but we are so used to it.
Yeah, all good. Just to explain it for our listeners as well. What made you really decide to found this company? Like you founded it in October last year. So
yes.
How was the way up to founding it? Like where was the idea? Did you have the idea? Did someone else have the idea? What was the impulse that basically resulted in the foundation of HTB, Humboldt-Tech Bridge?
Well, I don't know if I had the idea. Probably not. Somehow the idea popped up. Maybe as a background, I mean, I'm working a lot for InnoEU and HDB. This is my hobby, and I love this very much. But my paying job is being managing director of Specs, to a surface science company here in Berlin, with producing equipment for universities.
Okay, cool.
So China is a big market for us, and due to the customer base in universities, I have a lot of contacts to researchers in that place in China, and maybe in other places as well. And I always was, here in Europe, we have a tendency to say that you need diverse teams. But when we talk about diverse teams, we typically mean you need to have male, female, business development, marketing people, scientists. You think about these functional terms and not so much in a cultural. Nobody talks about diverse teams and says, what I mean is you need somebody from Europe, you need somebody from China, you need somebody from the United States, and you need somebody from in your team to cover the various areas. And this was something which is constantly puzzled me. I mean, you have here one of the biggest markets in the world, and if you have a non-differentiating product, then you don't go to China, you're probably going to be destroyed by Chinese competition sooner or later, simply because of the economy of scale there. You don't take this into account, and you don't take into account that you need to build your team, including somebody that has knowledge about this China marketplace, just to be able to understand what's going on there. And that was something which puzzled me. And it goes both ways, to be very honest. Chinese startup, Chinese research, even more blindfolded when it comes to cultural diversity.
Yeah.
It's something which they, as soon as they get out of the university, inside of the university, as long as they do their research, they are very open. They work very closely with all kinds of scientists around the world. As soon as you go out into the industry, you close your cultural reach. And that's something which we think is wrong. I think you need to open up when you start a company, not close.
Yeah. And I think it's a very valid point, especially in a increasingly globalized world, right? Most businesses want to scale globally, and yeah, they need people from all different backgrounds, because I think in every part of the world, there's different habits, there's different thoughts on different processes. And that's why there's always something to gain from putting diverse teams together, right?
Yeah, you mentioned the right word. There's something to gain.
Yeah,
it's not a burden. Sometimes, and I know this also when you talk to SMEs that are doing long-time business with China, it sounds like it's a burden that you need to customize your product to the Chinese end customer or to the Chinese B2B customer. Many people don't see this as a gain, that you're actually gaining from that. Your product, your innovation will become better if you take into account the needs and the desires of a big marketplace like China, and you take into account the ideas Chinese researchers might have about the same topic. Chinese business development people, salespeople, whatever it are, or customers have about the same topic. So it's a gain for your innovation, it's a gain for your company, it's not a burden. And if I might add, I don't want to turn this into a monologue, but one thing you have to understand, there are still many people in Europe running around and feeling that we are building a business in Europe, we are selling in Europe, and then I'm sending my products over to China and people will be just happy to buy them. And the only thing that I need to do is maybe some tweaking of a little change of the product. That was actually the case in the 90s. When I started in China, that was still the case. It was easy to sell something there as long as it came from Europe. Everybody was happy. The reputation of European products, particularly German products, is so high, and you be a German supplier and you don't need it to do anything. Right now, this has totally changed. Self-confidence of the Chinese marketplace is huge. Self-confidence of Chinese company leaders is huge. They're feeling very strong that they know what they are doing, and they're feeling that they are producing excellent products and that they have a lot of know-how. You cannot simply go over there and say, I'm having something new and I'm from Europe, Germany, or any other place. I'm having something new and be thankful that I'm giving it to you. Our attitude has to change here. Something that we have to learn. You adapt to the Chinese marketplace, or you shouldn't go there.
Yeah, I think also a good example is the automotive industry, right? When you look at the German car brands, for example, who went to China decades ago, every Chinese wanted to have them, of course. And I think they still are in high demand. But on the same time, we can also see that China is producing a lot of very innovative car brands themselves that can also tackle these German old car brands that have been there for decades. When you look at NIO, for example, or other manufacturers, I think it's
Geely,
or Geely, it's a good example for this change that has happened.
I think that is, I mean, the automotive manufacturers from Germany do very well in China, and so they're doing a really good job. However, you cannot believe in every field you will have Chinese competition. And so it is in automotive. And so it will be in every other business. You will have Chinese competition. And at this point today, with some exceptions, Huawei, and so we see many of the Chinese competitors focusing on the Chinese marketplace and not so much focusing on the global marketplace. This is something it's a mindset you still find in China a lot, in Germany also, but China is more understandable. Let's focus on the Chinese marketplace, it's big enough. But that the competitors, as soon as the products are reaching the level that it's globally competitive, they will expand, they will walk out. So it will not only be that the automotive manufacturer will have competition of Chinese car manufacturers in China. They will have that competition in Germany and in the United States and in South Africa and everywhere in the world, because the Chinese competitors are going to follow you. This is also something on a global scale which we have to be aware of and we have to get used to. It's not that we find Chinese competition in China. We should get used to the fact we will find them here too.
Definitely. Good point. I think what will be also interesting to know after this deep dive, tell us a bit about how you actually help these startups. What are the steps that you're taking with them together?
Yeah, I mean, the 3-step process is actually very simple explained. We have a first step, which is training here in Germany. So we give them cultural training, we do some mentoring, trying to prepare the startup or the people for the Chinese adventure, followed by trips to China. So we take them to events in China normally, and here you hear myself hesitating in the Corona crisis. This didn't happen in 2020 because we couldn't. Yeah, sure. And it still didn't happen until today. But one of our cornerstones is, in theory, you cannot learn about the marketplace. You need to go there. And online conferences are not a replacement for trips to China. So the second trip is going over there. We're organizing big conferences there with a lot of investors, with a lot of strategic potential customers that are interested in the technology. So we typically have trips where we have something like 40 to 60 guests and an audience of 500, 600 people from various industries. So we bring them on the big stage in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Chengdu, in Suzhou, in different places, so that you have a chance to see a little bit more from the country and have a chance to do your pitch a few more often. And most importantly is in between the trips and during that week to have discussions with potential investors, with strategic partners, and to see and to verify whether, as I mentioned before, we are not judging the idea, but these people will have an opinion about your idea. And then in the exchange, you will learn whether this is something which is very interesting, people are really interested in it, you're going to get a lot of questions, or it's something where you feel, I don't feel comfortable. So this is not going to give you any business in China, not the first step, not the second step. The third step is then we are inviting the people that have a real interest, that really want to adjust their strategy to the Chinese marketplace. We invite them to stay with us in China for something like 6 weeks to 3 months at least. And we work with them. We do a little bit of business development. So we do the settlement. So we have offices in an incubator there. We have some people that can help them. We have people in various industries. We organize the first lead contacts to the industries, to the customers, so that they have a chance to see for themselves and start their business in China little by little, I would say. And then after the 3 months, I think then it comes the decision point whether you really want to go. And then we have a landing service. So we can do the founding of the company, we can do the hiring, we can do the tax regime and so on. So these are then the practical service steps.
And this whole process, how long do you normally account for these 3 steps in terms of months, just as an idea?
Yeah, normally the preparation part is 2 months or so. So various events over 2 months we have. Normally the business trip to China should follow no later than 6 months after that, because you start to forget what you have heard about it. And then the third step is on an individual case-by-case basis. Typically, then we discuss with the startup on some deliverables that everything is clear. And then we do this third step. So this could be within the same year, or it could be 2 years later. It depends a little bit on the development cycle of the startup. We are relatively open. One of the key elements and an important message here is we are not up for working only for a few weeks with the startup. It's our focus to work with the startups for years. We know it takes time. So it's not, I'm doing this on the InnoEU side now since several years, and I'm still working with some of the startups which I met on my first month. So we work with them for many, many years. And all the startups that come to us and start with the Bridge to China program, they can be sure that we're going to be there for the years to come. Because I cannot tell, it might be that China is not an interesting option right now, but in 2 years it changes. So we stay in constant communication, and then as soon as the product, the innovation, and the startup is ready, we'll be there.
Yeah, sounds really good. I think you're creating some good value for young companies there, or at least for founder teams who have ideas. So that's really good. What I would like to ask you as well is, you talked about like your first time in China, right? When was your first time in China?
I think it was 1991 or 1992, so
okay.
a few years back.
Yeah.
A few years back.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it's clear that China has changed a lot during the last couple of decades. For this whole project of Humboldt-Tech Bridge, what do you think? How is this project, next to the economic side of things, helping startups? How is this project maybe also helping with intercultural exchange between the EU, between Europe and China?
Well, I hope it helps. Difficult for me to find strong words here. However, we all notice that on a political level, tensions between Europe and China, tensions between USA and China increasing. Together with the increase of tensions, there is an increased amount of misunderstanding, which has sometimes to do that we are not talking so much with each other anymore. We're talking about each other. So there's not as much exchange anymore between China and Europe as it was in the past. There's a strong industry exchange, and I think there's a big amount of knowledge about China in the German industry or in the European industry, but it's kind of closed in there. I think on our level, when we help that startup founders, researchers are talking to company founders, owners, incubators in China, people in China, young people like you, scientific background from the universities that are open-minded, we have a chance that little by little, this kind of grassroots work, we develop a common understanding about how we see the world. So we develop a common understanding that goes beyond innovations and business development to the level of, we share a little bit of the same values. And in my experience, 30 years in China, there's not only that Chinese people they like Germany, they like the German culture very much, but on a one-on-one level, we also share some values. Even if it's on a political level, it doesn't show. Only the differences currently are being emphasized. But on the one-on-one level, the differences are not that. And I think that was always in all decades the case when you had big political barriers between political regimes, that on a personal level, communication has always helped. And on a personal level, the differences are not that big. So I certainly hope it helps. But I'm cautious to say that this is the most important thing. I hope that the political tensions will ease and will be overcome in the future. I certainly hope. And I see it with with quite some concern that the tensions are currently increasing, and there are many people talking about a dual or a triple world where businesses in China are not allowed to expand to Europe and not from Europe to China anymore, and we have to duplicate things everywhere. I hope it's not going to get to that.
I hope that too. But I think it's a good initiative to really use the strong connection that we have on the economic level, also to work on the more social level as well, and foster exchange. So I think it's a good way to try to tackle this problem, at least. Coming back to a point you were making before about different technologies that make sense in China or don't make sense, it would be nice if you can dive a bit into these technologies that really are suitable for the Chinese market, and also talk a bit about what the specific benefit for European startups in Asia and in China specifically is. So what industries or what technologies from Europe really make sense in China and which don't make sense? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on these differences in this regard.
I try, but don't expect from me a complete answer.
No.
But I try to give some examples. It makes relatively little sense to expand into China in an area where the Chinese competition or the Chinese people are strongly believing about themselves and about their own capability. Because at the end of the day, you want to sell product. You don't want to convince anybody. You want to sell product. This is something very important. So you see in many areas of artificial intelligence, you see in many areas of software as a service. These are so typically areas where the cultural specialities of China play a very, very important role. And at the same time, you find that the self-confidence of Chinese companies in this area is extremely high. If you have a great product in this field, try, but the barriers will also be very, very high to get in there. I also, because of regulatory barriers, fintech is also not an easy. So this is not so. Fintech, insurance services is not. It becomes easier, it becomes more logical when you get into an area which is closer. I stay on the software side, logistics. Anything that manages logistics, service like container management and so on. Logistics is a very big issue. Road and Belt Initiative and all that has been in all newspapers. So this is something which basically finds a strong interest in China. Then comes a wide area from non-differentiating deep tech products like things that go into micro LEDs, quantum computing, materials, technologies, services that go into these areas. Even battery technology, also we sometimes believe that we are really behind. It's not true. There's many areas in Europe where we are really advanced, maybe on the manufacturing scale not. Anything organic electronics is something which has a big chance in China. And then comes the wide field medtech. Medical technologies have a huge interest there. It goes from blood testing vehicles to, we just had here from Charité in Berlin, Grown Valve, a very young company doing heart valves for infants. Excellent technology. This is something which is, not only in China, but due to the sheer number, there are more infants in China, and having that problem is certainly high. This is something which is at an extreme high desire very much. And I'm sorry, I forgot many good technologies in areas. There are certainly much more technologies that have a chance in China than the other way around.
Okay. Okay. And I think that's a very good takeaway, because I think what you talked about, the insurances, for example, they have very big insurances in China, right? That's why it doesn't really make sense so much.
And it's more also that the market is very regulated. I think some global companies are working, some global insurance companies are working there, but for a startup going into this market is probably not that easy. But I'm not talking out of my own experience. I'm talking about what I read and what I hear. It's not my own experience, but I know as a fact that in the other areas that I mentioned, because I worked with startup, I worked with companies in China, that there is a very, very strong robotics, not to forget.
Yeah, robotics.
Very, 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 very important. And in the medtech area, also exoskeletons is something which is anything that assisted living. China is a very, very fast maturing society, and assisting living systems have a high interest in China. So if somebody out there has a great innovation in that field, talk to us.
Perfect. And like in general, we talked about a few points, what these startups that come from Europe and go to China, what they can take from this. I mean, we talked about the market, we talked about diversity, but in general, what would you say, what else can those people, the founders of these companies, and of course also the teams that work with them, what can they take? These academic startups, what can they take and learn from the exchange and especially the collaboration between Europe and China?
I think I go back to my own experiences first, and I think most startups will, after some years, will look back and think of things the same. My experience with China was always when I transferred something into China, when we made an investment in China, for a long period of time, weeks and months, I was almost certain that they will never meet a deadline and it's never going to work. A long discussion. It has to do with the cultural background and the attempt to try to find consensus. Things take very long sometimes, and have the impression that they are very difficult. And I've always experienced that the acceleration of a project in the later phases is something mind-boggling. They get it done. They get it done when there is a deadline. They get it done. They get the product ready. They get the equipment ready. They get the building ready. They get it done, and they get it done at a quality level which is equal to what we do, and sometimes better. Really, honestly, sometimes we have to admit when we transferred something to China, actually it turned out to be better afterwards than it was before. Not easy to admit, but it's the truth. So I think that one of the takeaways that somebody really goes into China and really develops a business in China, they will be amazed about the acceleration of their business model that they will experience on the business side. If they stay on the university side, let's say the expansion into China for whatever reason didn't work, I'm still relatively sure that most likely their product is going to be better. And I think that the exchange with the Chinese scientists is something which is helping a product to become better in many, many ways. There's an enormous resource in China on very, very well-educated people. And we all know in Germany, in Europe, we have shortages in many areas. Find good programmers, good engineers, whatever. And that's something, the exchange, I think we will benefit from, very much so. Every startup will benefit from that. And I didn't even touch now all the cultural side of it, which is anyway, always a given.
I think so too, definitely. And what do you think could be main obstacles? I mean, we talked a bit about it, but what would you say are like the main obstacles for people who are going to China? Is it the different way of working that you also talked about, the getting things done? Is this maybe something where founders have to get accommodated with, or is it more the culture? Is it the food? What do you think? What is the main point?
Not the last one.
Yeah.
I mean, you've spent a lot of time in China, you know. It's not the food, and it's not any of the other things. I mean, we have pretty much everything everywhere in the world right now. So that part is not. I think the biggest obstacle is the same fear you have when you get out of the laboratory from the university. So you have a brilliant idea, you think that something could work, but then comes a moment where you have to put your commitment behind it. You have to open the door of your laboratory and you have to start your company. And that's a moment of fear. You're fearing that you fail, you fear that nobody's going to buy it, you fear that you're not going to have any money, no income, nothing to pay your rent from. And that's the same fear that many people have when they first come to.
This is where you're helping, right?
This is, we try to ease that. We try to bring it down to as much as possible to what's fact-based. And what are the elements that can help you to overcome. And in a way, it's exactly the same as Humboldt Innovation does with the young researchers when they found the company. They encourage them. It's not so difficult to open the door and go out there. It's just, there are people here to help you. There are structures, there are supporting systems around, and that's the same what we do. So somebody from Europe that goes to China is like opening a door and going into, well, a new world, if you want. And there's, together with that, is a little bit of fear, whether they will survive it. And we tell them, we be on the other side, we wait for you, we have a structure, we make it easy for you. We cannot guarantee you success, but we can guarantee you that you will not, there will be no need to fear what's ahead of you.
Yeah.
That's, if I stay with that. So that's maybe you could use a different word, but fear, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Making the next step is always the uncertainty, which is sometimes blocking the open mind.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think I could go on and talk about this topic with you for another 2 hours maybe, but I'd like to close our interview with one question about also your experience with China. You said you went 1991 the first time to China, right? What would you say was the biggest learning that you took with you while traveling to China? What was the most catchy thing that stuck with you?
So I'm same as before, I'm using now one word: trust. It took me a while. Well, going there for the first time, I don't speak any Chinese. Translation was not that easy. A lot of things were difficult in the 90s. No, never tried. I don't have much talent for languages anyway.
Okay.
And learning Chinese is certainly something for a lifetime.
Definitely.
Now I came to China with all the pictures in my brain, like so many others. There are millions of people that work for low income, and everything is cheap, and we have the feeling that everything is kind of equal there. And learning that there are huge differences from region to region, huge differences from city to city, from block to block. People are different there. Learning that in business you can work with them, you can educate, you can learn together with them. That's probably the better word. And then learning to trust that. I mean, I was transferring activities and making investments in China. And the initial mindsets in the 90s was, you need to bring a manager from Germany to China. He needs to manage that because you cannot trust the Chinese people to do it for themselves. And over the years, I learned that this is not true. This is absolutely not true. You make mistakes in Germany, you make mistakes in China, but they're all the same. Yeah. You find the right people, you can trust them, and you can really rely on them. That was the biggest learning I took away from China in 25, 30 years now.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful ending note. I want to thank you, Ferdinand, for your time. It was very interesting to speak with you about this project and about the developments. And yeah, we're definitely gonna follow this project, and yeah, we probably will talk about it in another episode, I guess.
Anytime. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you for the very good questions, and I hope that the audience gonna like the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bridge to China, a podcast by Humboldt-Tech Bridge. If you want to find out more about what we do, head to our website, humboldt-tech-bridge.com. For feedback, you can write us an email at info@humboldt-tech-bridge.com. This podcast is produced by ILU, the community of European and Chinese changemakers.